Instructor Vexithala had spent 3 centuries perfecting the art of intellectual cruelty, and today's lecture hall buzzed with the particular tension that preceded one of her famous demolitions. The amphitheater of the Tervanaki War College stretched in polished obsidian tiers, each level representing another species' attempt to prove their military worthiness. 12 distinct forms of advanced evolution sat in rigid attention. Their various appendages, sensory organs, and breathing apparatus all focused on the holographic display hovering above the central dais. The Morvac Dilemma, Vexithala announced, her vocal cords producing the melodious death knell that had ended more promising military careers than 3 separate galactic wars, has maintained its perfect record for 847 standard years. Not one solution. Not one. The Korath delegation, all 4 arms crossed in perfect synchronization, nodded approvingly. Honor-bound warrior culture appreciated impossible odds. The Zelthani representatives hummed in mathematical harmony, already running probability matrices through their hive-linked consciousness. Even the usually dismissive Vesperian scout captain leaned forward, her crystalline exoskeleton catching the hologram's light. In the back row, slouched against her chair with the kind of casual disregard that made Vexithala's primary heart skip irritated beats, sat the exchange student, the human, the Academy's first and, if Vexithala had anything to say about it, last representative of that chaotic little species from the Spiral Arms backwater. "Tell me, Cadet Zonmira," Vexithala purred, selecting her first victim from among the Zelthani. "What does your preliminary analysis suggest about the mining station's defensive position?" Zonmira's response came in the perfectly modulated tone of someone who had never encountered a problem that couldn't be solved through sufficient computational power. The gravitational anomalies create 17 distinct approach vectors for enemy forces. Standard defensive protocols suggest establishing overlapping fields of fire across primary axes, but the station's power grid cannot support more than 4 heavy weapons simultaneously. Over 97% of viewers here are watching without subscribing. Don't be one of them. Hit that subscribe button right now and join the journey. Every click helps us grow stronger, and you'll never miss the next epic story. Precisely. And the terrain advantages? None exist. The asteroid field provides cover for attackers while the station remains exposed on all vectors. The mining equipment cannot be repurposed for military applications without violating core structural integrity. Vexithala's smile could have frozen methane. Anyone else? Captain Brutalix of the Korath delegation stood, all 4 arms now gesturing in the ritual patterns of tactical discourse. Honor demands we consider the defensive merits of concentrated resistance. If the mining station's defenders accept glorious death, they might delay enemy advance by 7 hours, 16 minutes. This would allow evacuation of secondary objectives. 7 hours, 16 minutes, Vexithala repeated. Against an enemy force that outnumbers defenders 40-1, possesses superior firepower, and controls the only escape routes. Anyone care to explain how this constitutes victory? The Vesperian scout captain's translation unit crackled. Victory is irrelevant. The scenario parameters make survival impossible. This is a test of how gracefully one accepts defeat. "Ah, but you're all missing the central question," Vexithala said, her voice dropping to that conversational register that preceded academic evisceration. Who designed these parameters? Who decided that 40-1 odds represent insurmountable disadvantage? Who determined that mining equipment cannot become weapons? The human in the back row hadn't moved, but something in her posture had shifted. Where she'd been slouching before, now she was still. Attentive, like a predator that had just noticed something interesting. The scenario's designers, offered a nervous-looking Pithaki junior officer, based parameters on historical precedent and mathematical modeling. Historical precedent, Vexithala repeated slowly, meaning every species represented in this room has contributed their finest military minds to the dilemma's development. The Korath honor warriors provided tactical doctrine. Zelthani computational matrices determined probability frameworks. Vesperian scouts mapped terrain advantages. The Pithaki contributed supply chain logistics. Even the Draknari, she gestured toward the imposing reptilian forms in the middle rows, shared their siege-breaking strategies. The humans still hadn't spoken, hadn't even shifted position. But her eyes were moving now, tracking across the holographic display with systematic precision that reminded Vexithala uncomfortably of how scavengers examined potential prey. 8 centuries, Vexithala continued, building toward her crescendo, of the galaxy's finest military institutions throwing their best minds against this scenario. Every conceivable strategy attempted, every possible approach explored, every logical solution proven inadequate. What about illogical solutions? The question came from the back row, delivered in the human's flat, unaccented standard. Not defiant, not challenging, just curious. The amphitheater fell silent with the particular quality of silence that preceded either breakthrough or catastrophe. I beg your pardon? Vexithala's voice could have cut through starship armor. The human finally straightened in her chair, her movement casual enough to be either respectful attention or subtle mockery. You said every logical solution has been attempted. I was wondering about the illogical ones. Military science, Vexithala explained, with the patience usually reserved for particularly slow children, operates on logical principles. Strategy follows established doctrine. Tactics utilize proven methodologies. We are not running experiments in creative writing. Right, the human said agreeably. Of course not. The Korath delegation exchanged glances. Captain Brutalix leaned toward his companion and whispered in their guttural combat language. Humans possess no warrior traditions worth respecting. Their species survived through luck and stubborn refusal to accept honorable defeat. The Zelthani hive mind hummed disapproval. Chaos-prone, mathematical modeling suggests their tactical unpredictability stems from insufficient processing power rather than strategic insight. 72 hours, Vexithala announced, returning attention to the scenario parameters. You will work individually, no collaboration, no consultation, no external resources beyond standard military databases. The Morvac dilemma has ended the careers of generals, broken the confidence of admirals, and humbled every tactical genius this galaxy has produced. She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the assembled students before settling, inevitably, on the human in the back row. I trust none of you are arrogant enough to believe you'll be the first to solve it. The human was quiet for a long moment, apparently considering this statement with the same methodical attention she'd been giving the holographic display. Finally, she nodded. Probably not, she agreed cheerfully. But it sounds like fun to try. Vexithala's smile returned, colder than vacuum and twice as deadly. She'd taught at the War College long enough to recognize the difference between confidence and delusion. This was going to be entertaining. Hour 18 of the trial found the War College's simulation chambers buzzing with the sort of focused desperation that marked serious academic warfare. Each species had claimed their preferred workspace. The Korath delegation occupied the tactical theater with its holographic battlefield projectors. The Zelthani had requisitioned the mathematical modeling suite, and the Vesperians clustered around quantum probability engines that hummed with crystalline precision. Captain Brutalix slammed his primary fist against the tactical display, causing miniature starships to scatter across the projection like startled insects. 17 separate assault patterns, he growled to his companion, All result in Defender annihilation within 4 hours. Perhaps if we concentrate our entire defensive grid on the station's northern approach, suggested Junior Captain Thakmore, manipulating holographic weapon placements with nervous efficiency. Negative. Northern concentration leaves eastern vectors completely exposed. Enemy forces simply redirect assault patterns and reduce defensive effectiveness by 37%. In the adjoining chamber, Zonmira's mathematical harmony had dissolved into discordant confusion. Her hive-linked consciousness processed data streams with mechanical precision, but every calculation produced identical results. Systematic defeat across all probability matrices. Computational analysis suggests modifying power distribution algorithms, hummed her nest sister Relmira. If we reduce life support systems to minimal operational parameters, already attempted, reduces defender capability faster than it extends weapon system functionality. The mathematics remain insurmountable. The Vesperian scout captain had abandoned traditional tactical approaches entirely, instead focusing her crystalline sensory apparatus on environmental factors. Her translation unit crackled with frustrated static as she addressed her fellow scouts. Asteroid field compositions offer 17 mineral variants suitable for improvised explosive devices. Unfortunately, mining equipment lacks precision necessary for effective deployment. Maximum estimated enemy casualties, 12 units of 40,000. 12 casualties, her subordinate repeated, against 40,000 attackers. Affirmative, tactically insignificant. 3 floors below, in a cramped individual study pod normally reserved for remedial coursework, the human sat cross-legged on the floor with her personal datapad balanced on her knees. She wasn't running tactical simulations or calculating probability matrices. Instead, she appeared to be reading the scenario documentation with the methodical attention of someone reviewing a particularly interesting technical manual. Her approach would have horrified every military instructor in the galaxy. While other species studied enemy movement patterns, she was examining mining equipment specifications. While they analyzed weapon deployment strategies, she browsed environmental hazard reports. While they calculated defensive positioning, she read legal disclaimers buried in the scenario's terms of operation. The first major breakdown occurred at hour 24. Captain Brutalix found himself facing his reflection in the tactical theater's darkened display screen, 4 arms hanging in defeat. "Honor demands acknowledgement of tactical impossibility," he announced to his companion. "The scenario permits no pathway to victory." "Perhaps," Thakmore suggested hesitantly, "we approach this incorrectly. What if defensive victory is not the objective?" "Explain." "What if our purpose is demonstrating proper military protocols under impossible circumstances, showing correct tactical thinking even when facing certain defeat?" Brutalix considered this with the gravity that Korath warriors reserved for matters of existential importance. "You suggest the trial tests our methodology rather than our success rate." "Precisely." Instructor Vexithala emphasized that 8 centuries of military genius have failed. Perhaps failure is expected. Perhaps the trial measures how we fail. This reasoning spread through the War College like a philosophical plague. By hour 36, most species had reached similar conclusions. The Draknari siege specialists announced that the scenario was designed to test strategic patience under hopeless conditions. The Pathaki logistics officers decided it measured supply chain optimization. During inevitable collapse, even the Zelthani hive mind concluded that mathematical precision mattered more than mathematical results. Only the human seemed uninterested in this collective rationalization. Zonmira discovered this during hour 42, when she ventured into the remedial study section, seeking additional computational resources. She found the human still sitting on the floor, now surrounded by scattered data pads displaying mining equipment technical specifications, environmental hazard assessments, and what appeared to be legal documentation. "Curious," Zonmira observed. her vocal harmonics indicating polite confusion. Your research methodology appears unrelated to tactical considerations. The human glanced up, apparently surprised to discover she wasn't alone. Oh, hey, yeah, I was trying to figure out how the mining station actually works. All the tactical stuff assumes we know what we're working with, but nobody seems to have read the equipment manuals. Equipment manuals possess no strategic relevance. The scenario provides necessary tactical parameters. Does it, though? The human gestured toward her scattered datapads. Like, here's something interesting. The mining station's primary excavation system uses controlled demolition charges, thousands of them, but the tactical briefing lists mining equipment as non-military assets unsuitable for defensive purposes. Zonmira's harmonics shifted toward academic curiosity. Controlled demolition charges possess obvious military applications. Right? And here's another thing. The station's ore processing facility uses magnetic acceleration systems for launching refined materials into orbit. Basically, it's a mass driver. But again, the tactical briefing categorizes it as civilian infrastructure. Mass drivers represent primitive but effective kinetic weapon systems. Exactly. The human's enthusiasm struck Zonmira as slightly unhinged. And the environmental hazard warnings mention that the asteroid field contains 17 different mineral compositions, including some that become highly reactive when exposed to specific electromagnetic frequencies. Zonmira's mathematical consciousness began processing these implications with growing horror, not because the ideas were wrong, but because they were so obviously correct that their absence from standard tactical consideration suggested something fundamentally broken in conventional military thinking. Your approach violates established strategic doctrine, she informed the human. I know, the human replied cheerfully. Isn't that interesting? Hour 58 brought presentations, and Vexthala had never felt more vindicated in her assessment of galactic military intelligence. Each species delivered their analyses with the sort of professional competence that made failure seem noble rather than embarrassing. The Dreknari contingent presented first, their reptilian forms arranged in perfect hierarchical formation. Commander Sixtal's presentation crackled with dignified resignation as she outlined their defensive strategy. Siege analysis confirms defender disadvantage across all vectors, she reported, her scaled digits manipulating holographic displays with practiced efficiency. Recommended approach: strategic withdrawal to secondary positions, implementing scorched void protocols to deny enemy resource acquisition. Translation, Vexthala observed with satisfaction. You retreat and destroy everything useful. Affirmative. Projected defender survival, 0%. Enemy strategic gain reduction, 43%. At least you're honest about the mathematics, Vexthala conceded. Captain Brutalix, your contribution? The Korath delegation approached with the ceremonial gravity that their warrior culture demanded for formal defeat. Brutalix's four-armed salute conveyed more honor than most species managed during victory celebrations. Battle analysis demonstrates impossible tactical parameters, he announced. Honor requires acknowledgement. The scenario permits no path to triumph. Our recommendation focuses on maximizing defensive valor while minimizing dishonor through premature capitulation. Meaning, we fight until annihilation, ensuring enemy forces sustain maximum casualties during our glorious defeat. How refreshingly predictable, Vexthala murmured. Zonmira, your mathematical insights? The Zilthani representative's harmonics conveyed the sort of computational certainty that most species reserved for physical laws. Probability matrices confirm scenario impossibility. We have identified 12,847 distinct tactical variations. All result in defender elimination within 4.7 standard hours. Yet you still attempted solutions? Correct. Mathematical precision requires exhaustive analysis regardless of predetermined outcomes. Our calculations demonstrate optimal resource allocation during inevitable collapse. Vexthala's smile grew sharper with each presentation. The Vesperians offered crystalline clarity about reconnaissance advantages that led nowhere. The Pithaki provided detailed logistics for supply chains that couldn't prevent defeat. Even the usually innovative Mithari had produced nothing more creative than elaborate surrender protocols. And now, Vexithala announced, her gaze settling on the human who had spent the entire presentation period scribbling notes on a physical pad of paper, an affectation so primitive it bordered on insulting. Our exchange student, I trust you've learned something educational about proper military analysis? The human looked up from her notes with the sort of mild confusion that suggested she'd been paying attention to something completely different. Oh, definitely. Very educational. Excellent. Would you care to share your analysis of the Morvac dilemma? Actually, the human said, gathering her primitive note-taking materials. I have a few questions first. The amphitheater settled into the sort of silence that preceded either disaster or entertainment. Vexithala gestured for her to continue. The mining station's operational charter, that's a legal document, right? Like, it defines what the station is legally authorized to do? Obviously. And the scenario briefing mentions that all station operations must remain within legal parameters throughout the simulation? Standard operational requirement. Continue. Right, so I was wondering. The human consulted her handwritten notes. The charter authorizes controlled demolition activities for mineral extraction purposes and mass acceleration of processed materials for orbital deployment, but it doesn't specifically prohibit using these systems for defensive purposes. Vexithala's first heart skipped a beat. Not because the observation was brilliant, but because it was so fundamentally wrong about how military simulations worked. Mining equipment cannot be repurposed for military applications. This violates basic scenario parameters. Does it, though? I mean, the charter says the demolition charges are for mineral extraction, but it doesn't specify which minerals. And some of the asteroids in the field contain reactive compounds that become highly explosive when properly triggered. Asteroids are not military targets. But they're not protected either, the human pointed out with irritating reasonableness. The scenario mentions environmental hazards but doesn't classify them as off-limits. And if controlled demolitions accidentally destabilize asteroid formations during routine mining operations? Captain Brutalix leaned forward with the expression of someone watching a traffic accident develop in real time. You cannot weaponize industrial equipment by pretending it remains industrial. Why not? The human asked. The scenario doesn't prohibit industrial accidents. It just requires that all operations remain within legal parameters. Mining stations have industrial accidents all the time. Zonmira's mathematical consciousness was processing implications faster than she could vocalize them. Your proposed solution involves deliberately triggering catastrophic system failures. Well, when you put it like that, it sounds dangerous, the human agreed. But the legal documentation is really clear about liability. As long as all equipment operates within manufacturer specifications during routine mining activities, any resulting environmental effects fall under standard industrial hazard protocols. This is insane, the Vesperian scout captain announced through her translation unit. You propose destroying the mining station to defend it. Not destroying, the human corrected. Relocating. The mass driver system can launch much more than processed ore. And if the station's structural integrity becomes compromised during routine operations, emergency protocols require evacuating personnel to secondary positions. Vexithala felt the peculiar sensation of her educational worldview developing stress fractures. Secondary positions do not exist in this scenario. Actually, they do. The human flipped through her handwritten notes again. Emergency protocols reference mobile defensive platforms for personnel evacuation during industrial disasters. Those would be the mining shuttles, which are equipped with basic maneuvering systems and emergency life support. Mining shuttles are not warships. Nope, the human agreed cheerfully, but they're not restricted from carrying mining equipment for emergency operations, including controlled demolition charges for clearing debris during rescue missions. The amphitheater had gone quiet with the particular quality of silence that preceded either revolutionary breakthroughs or complete mental collapse. The human stood, reached back with both hands, and gathered her hair into a practical knot at the base of her skull. The gesture was so casual, so mundane, that it took several seconds for anyone to realize she was preparing for something significant. "Right," she said, walking toward the central holographic display with the confident stride of someone who had just figured out how to rewire the universe. "So here's what happens." She touched the display controls, and the Morvac mining station materialized in three-dimensional detail above the amphitheater. But instead of the sterile tactical overview that had dominated previous presentations, her display showed every industrial system in full operational status. "First, we acknowledge that defending a fixed position against overwhelming odds is militarily stupid," she began, her tone conversational enough to suggest she was discussing weather patterns rather than overturning 8 centuries of tactical assumptions. "So we don't." Her fingers danced across the controls, highlighting the station's demolition systems. "Standard mining operations require controlled explosions for asteroid processing. We're going to have a very busy day of routine mineral extraction." The holographic display shifted, showing demolition charges positioned throughout the asteroid field. Not in defensive patterns, in mining configurations that happened to create overlapping fields of destruction across every enemy approach vector. Commander Sixtal's scaled features contorted with professional horror. "Those detonation patterns will destabilize the entire asteroid field." "Yep, industrial accident. Very tragic. Happens all the time in dangerous mining operations. The environmental hazards alone are covered under standard liability protocols," the human interrupted cheerfully, "which require immediate evacuation of all personnel to emergency shelters pending hazmat assessment." She manipulated the display again, showing the mining shuttles launching from the station just as the asteroid field began its carefully choreographed collapse. Emergency evacuation procedures, fully compliant with safety regulations. Vexithala found her voice, though it emerged as more of a croak than her usual melodious authority. "You cannot evacuate during enemy attack. That constitutes retreat." "Not retreat. Temporary relocation due to environmental hazards created by routine industrial operations." The human's smile could have powered a small star. "The enemy force is welcome to occupy a mining station that's currently experiencing catastrophic system failures in an asteroid field undergoing uncontrolled gravitational collapse." The implications hit the assembled military minds like a cascade of falling dominoes. Zonmira's harmonics dissolved into mathematical static as her consciousness attempted to process the logical framework. "Your solution eliminates both defensive position and attacking force simultaneously." "Well, the attacking force has choices," the human conceded. "They can withdraw to safe distance and wait for the asteroid field to stabilize, which takes approximately 16 standard hours, during which our evacuated personnel can summon reinforcements. Or they can press their attack through an active industrial disaster zone, losing about 70% of their force to environmental hazards before engaging any actual defenders." "And if they choose the second option?" The human touched the display controls one final time, showing the mining shuttle's emergency equipment manifests. "Emergency rescue operations require portable demolition charges for debris clearance, and the shuttle's ore processing equipment makes excellent improvised kinetic weapons, when loaded with reactive asteroid fragments. Captain Brutalix stared at the tactical display with the expression of someone watching their entire philosophical framework catch fire. You have transformed a defensive siege into mobile guerrilla warfare using industrial equipment and safety regulations. Pretty much, the human agreed, though technically we never violated any military protocols because we never engaged in military operations. Just really unfortunate timing with routine mining activities. The silence stretched across the amphitheater like an accusation. 8 centuries of military tradition sat in stunned recognition that they had been thinking about the problem exactly backwards. Finally, Vexithala managed to form words. How did you know? Know what? That approaching it this way would work. That treating military scenario as industrial problem would reveal solution that pure tactical analysis could not. The human considered this question with the same methodical attention she had given everything else, as if the answer should be obvious to anyone who thought about it properly. I guess I never assumed it was impossible, she said. You kept telling us that 8 centuries of military genius had failed, like that meant something significant. But all that really told me was that military thinking wasn't the right tool for this particular job. She gestured toward the holographic display, where the mining station continued its carefully orchestrated transformation from defensive liability into tactical advantage. Sometimes the best way to win a war is to refuse to fight one. Vexthala stared at the human for a long moment, her centuries of educational certainty crumbling like poorly constructed fortifications. Finally, she managed to ask the question that had been building pressure behind her vocal cords since the demonstration began. What do you call this strategy? The human grinned, the expression bright enough to illuminate the amphitheater's shadowed corners. Tuesday,